everyone. A very good afternoon to you today. Hi, thank you for joining us today. My name is Deepam and I'm the Center Manager for Bishan Learning Center. I will be your host for this morning. Now, usually after the session, a Q&A will roughly take about 10 to 15 minutes. All right. Our speakers are from the DAS Academy and our learning centers managers will also be able to answer some of the questions live. Now, if you're interested in any of our courses or workshops related to this talk, we will be featuring some upcoming courses and links for you, and will be posted in the chat box. So do have a look later. Without further ado, please enjoy the talk, sit back, and we will see you shortly.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I'm one of the Associate Lecturers with DAS Academy. I'm also a lead educational therapist at DAS, and I provide intervention for learners in both literacy and mathematics. Today, I'm going to share a little about the importance of assessments and how it leads you to provide support for your learners in mathematics. With that, I'll be sharing some math strategies with you, which I hope would be helpful for you to support your learner. Firstly, even before we get on with the strategies, it would be good to know a little about how you could assess your learners. Assessing your learners is the first stage in supporting them. It helps you to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your learner. It provides you a direction to support them. It helps you to focus on areas of difficulties and think of how you could use their strengths to overcome their weaknesses. Assessments could be formative or summative. What most of us would be familiar with are the summative assessments, which includes standardized tests and screeners. Summative assessments evaluates learning, informs future planning, and provides information about student proficiency of the concepts. For example, screeners helps teachers to distinguish between those individuals who have poor math attainment and those whose difficulties are associated with dyscalculia. The complexity of numerical processing has made defining what it means to have a specific mathematical learning difficulty, such as dyscalculia, difficult. Traditional definitions state that pupil must substantially underachieve on a standardized test relative to the level expected given age, education, and intelligence, and must experience disruption to academic achievement or daily living. Standardized achievement tests, however, generally test a range of skills, which may include spatial and verbal abilities, before collapsing the total into one global score of mathematics achievement. Standardized assessments are formal assessments that have been designed to measure a child's ability compared to other children of their age. These standardized tests are diverse, so what is meant by mathematics achievement may vary substantially between tests. However, formative assessments, which includes qualitative assessments, allow teachers and parents to monitor students' learning. It informs instruction and provides information about student misconceptions and background knowledge. Formative assessments could be formal or informal. Formal ones are the diagnostic tests. For instance, having a class test every fortnightly would allow me as a teacher to understand how well my learners have progressed and have understood the topic. However, qualitative assessment is focused on understanding how people make meaning of and experience their environment or world. It is about trying to understand why the child has provided a particular answer. This is important as we are trying to understand how the child has understood what you have taught and to analyze their thought processes. Qualitative assessment tells us why the child is unable to answer the question in a standardized test or screeners. So, when the child sits for an exam, it tests their ability compared to learners of same age group. However, everyone performs differently. As such, it is important to then take a closer look at the paper and analyze and understand why the student has answered the question in a particular way and to know why he or she has gotten the answer wrong. This can be done in many ways. It could be by analyzing their error patterns. For example, by looking at the paper, you realize that the student is good in addition. But when he moves on to subtraction, he has difficulties to group the numbers in the working. This is a common error that you notice throughout the paper. This gives you an idea that the child has difficulties in regrouping. And as such, you can then look at ways to help the learner understand the concept better by riding on his strength, which is addition. Therefore, I would teach him regrouping through addition, which is his strength, before I get him to apply it in subtraction. You could use place value chart and blocks to get him or her to understand what regrouping is. Let me show you how this can be done. This is the place value chart and base 10 blocks. You can even use Lego blocks. Before we start using the base blocks or even the Lego blocks, we need to first introduce to students the concept of tens and ones. We can explain this using a place value house. For the ones house, only single-digit numbers are allowed inside. Two-digit numbers have to move to the tens house. Show students a number of Lego blocks. Count them and get them to tell you the total first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. In this case, there are 12 Lego blocks altogether. Get them to remember this. Write it somewhere for them to remember. Remember we had 12 earlier? Now what we need to do is to move these 12 blocks into the place value house. As they are all single blocks, they should be placed in the ones house first. Then remind them that only single-digit numbers can be in the ones house. Now, recount them and see if you can form a 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Get them to put the 10 single blocks together to form one long strip of 10. Ask them what they should do with this strip of 10. They should tell you that it should be moved to the tens house. Remember, there are 2 individual blocks left. As these are not enough to form a 10, they remain in the ones house. Get them to recount the total again. 1 10 plus 2 ones. If they are unsure, get them to count the individual blocks in the strip and add with the remaining 2 blocks. It still adds up to 12, the original answer they had previously. What happened now is that instead of 10 individual blocks put together with 2 individual blocks, 10 individual blocks have been converted to one long strip of 10. We need to get students to gradually be more automatic in recognizing this. We want them to be able to count in tens when there are many strips instead of still counting one by one. Now it is pretty straightforward when it comes to addition without regrouping. Students can count on from the last number to get the total number. Let's look at this example. 11 plus 7. Students see 1 10 and 1 individual block. They add 10 plus 1 to get 11. Now we want to add 7 to these. Students can just go 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and they would have found the answer. Now the challenge is when it comes to regrouping. A lot of times, students don't really understand why they are regrouping. When we teach them the procedures, for example, 18 plus 7, we teach them to add the ones first. So in this case, it is 8 plus 7. We get 15. Then we tell them 15 is too much. We cannot put 15 in the ones column. So we leave 5 and bring the 1 over to the tens column. This is where the confusion happens. When we use the word 1, the total of 1 and 5 is actually 6. So how come the number we got earlier was 15? To strengthen their procedural understanding, it has to be accompanied with conceptual understanding, so that students can visually see and understand what it is that we are really bringing over to the tens column. Let's look at the same example again. 18 plus 7. I have 18 blocks. I add 7 to this. We know we always start adding from the ones column. When we add, what happens is we are putting it all together. So we put this 8 and 7 together. Let's count the total here. You'll get 15. But remember, only single-digit numbers can be in the ones house. What do we need to do? Let's see if we can form a 10 that we can move to the tens house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we count individual blocks until we get 10. So there's a 10 here. Let's put them together to form a strip. We can then move this strip over to the tens column. We explain to the students that the 1 that we bring over to the tens column is actually 110. We regroup 15 ones into 110 and 5 ones. And because we cannot have a 10 in the ones column, we bring that 110 over, leaving only 5 ones. So now in the tens column, we have 2 tens, which leaves us with the answer 25. That was done by analyzing the error pattern in the assessment paper. Another way to understand how your learner has performed is by engaging them through discussion and through the use of concrete materials to provide them an opportunity to demonstrate their understanding. For example, if the child is presented with the following question, 28 plus 7 equals, and the child leaves the question blank, we shouldn't ignore this, but try to understand why the child has left the question blank. Is it because the learner did not understand the question? Can the learner add 2 numbers? Were they frightened to write an answer as they felt it might be incorrect? Answers to these questions would allow us to provide a better support for the learner. We can then focus on the areas that the child truly has difficulties in and might have been a barrier to their learning. So for example, if the child did not answer this question because he was afraid that the answer might be incorrect, we probably got to work on his confidence level. We can only get to the root of the problem when we engage the learners through meaningful conversations where they share with us what exactly was going on when they were answering the question. So this is another example. Again, we do not focus just on the end product, but rather try to understand why the learner has answered in a specific manner. And then we address the difficulty by providing the appropriate support. Any testing situation raises anxiety level. Students with learning difficulties will find any written test to be especially stressful. A qualitative assessment that involves discussion, concrete resources, and interactive games will lower anxiety levels and give a more accurate picture of the students' math abilities, as well as to rebuild their confidence and enjoyment of math. It is important to also understand that standardized tests and qualitative assessments work together. This is where introducing specific strategies that are appropriate for the learners become important. If the learner is not able to learn in the way that we teach, then we teach the way the learner learns. So for example, this is the usual way of doing division. Some learners find it difficult to understand this. There could be many reasons. There are many numbers involved. There are many layers in this method, and there are many operations involved as well. It may look cluttered for some learners. As such, we might want to think of a different way to help them to do the division confidently. Let's look at this question, for example. 1065 divided by 3. As mentioned earlier, the earlier method may look cluttered, which might be a distraction for some learner. They might have difficulties to visualize or group the numbers. This method that I'm going to show you groups the numbers in a single row, and it is easier for them to visualize. So let's look at this. Students write 1065 with the digits a little further apart from each other, divided by 3, the usual way. So they do the working. So what times 3 give me 1? So 0, that's the closest. And therefore 1 minus 0 is 1. Now, instead of bringing the digit 0 down, what I do is I bring this digit 1 up to 0, and it forms 10. So in that way, the learner gets to see that they are working with number 10 right now. It is clearer and it's not cluttered. So what times 3 give me 10? The closest is 3 times 3 gives me 9. So I take 10 minus 9, which I get 1. Again, I bring the digit 1 up to 6, and this forms the number 16. So now the learner clearly knows that they are working with 16. So what's the closest number we can get? 5 times 3 is 15. So I take 16 minus 15. I get a remainder of 1. Same thing, I will bring this digit 1 to the next digit, and it forms 15. So now the learner is working with number 15. So 5 times 3 is 15, which leaves me with no remainder, and therefore my answer is 355. I have shared this method with many participants who attended my math course, and they have found this very useful. This works very well for my students too. We could also provide some checking strategies by introducing the divisibility rules. There are many rules, and one of it is, if the sum of the digits is divisible by 9, then there will be no remainders. So for example, 932 divided by 9, I take the number 932, I add each digit up, and the total I get is 14. 14 is not a multiple of 9, and as such, when I divide this number, I will get a remainder. For this example, 783 divided by 9, when I add the digits 783, 7 plus 8 plus 3, I get 18. 18 is a multiple of 9, and as such, there will be no remainders when I do this division. Now, this information is helpful for the learner to check on their answers. You are providing a self-checking strategy over here. There are some topics that students might find it especially challenging. It might require them to apply more than one concept to solve the question. For example, percentage. Now let's look at this question. 7% of 300. Firstly, students need to understand what does 7% mean. Next, they need to understand what is this 300. They need to understand part and whole. They also need to understand what does 7% of means. Getting learners to understand the concept itself is important. So for this question, 7% of 300 is 7%. When I say percent, it's each 100. So over here in this question, there are 300. What it means that in each 100, there are 7. So to get my learners to visualize, I will draw 3 circles to represent 100. And each of these 100 has 7 in it. So what happens? I will add them up, and that gives me 21, the answer. So 7% of 300 is 21. This is another way to do this question. By helping learners to understand the terms used and to get them to visualize it, helps them to remember the concept better and apply it easily in different questions. So in this case, 7% of 300, the usual way of doing it would be by using fraction, 7 out of 100 times 300. For learners who have difficulties to do that method, might actually choose this method. Now, there are plenty of strategies that I could share, but unfortunately, I'm unable to do so in such a short period of time. But I hope you could join me in the upcoming courses where I would be sharing more about the concepts and strategies in detail. These are the upcoming courses for math. Do visit our website to find out more about these courses. Hope this session was helpful to you. Looking forward to seeing you in my other courses. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was indeed interesting. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you had a fruitful session and understanding from this talk. On your screen, we have shared the QR code for our feedback form, as well as links to other DAS sites for your reference. Now, we'll be sharing a bit on our upcoming courses from the DAS Academy, in which we will stay back after this session for the bit of the Q&A so that we can actually address some of your queries regarding these courses. For example, one of the courses that we will be sharing later, all right, in detail will be the certificate in supporting SPLD learners in higher order mathematical skills. Now, this will be held from the 7th to the 29th of April 2021. And the registration course actually closes on the 1st of April. So do think about it. If you really want to sign up, it's there in our website too. Now, this course provides participants, the one that I just told you, with the theoretical understanding of various cognitive skills. Now, participants will be provided with a practical strategy on how to support SPLD learners in higher order mathematical skills. Do go to our DAS Academy website to find out more. Let's move on to our Q&A session, in which it will roughly take about 10 to 15 minutes, give and take. You may ask whatever questions pertaining to this webinar this time, which we will do our best to answer as much as we can. Okay, without further ado, we have our speaker, Ms. Rebecca Shalinah, an associate lecturer with the DAS Academy and lead educational therapist from DAS to address educational questions. And I will also be present to help out queries pertaining to our learning centers. So let's begin. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Dee. Hi, everyone. Okay.
Thanks for the video just now.
No problem. Okay, we have a number of questions on the Q&A, so maybe I will address one at a time. All right.
Sure.
So there's this question about a child who's in our current math program for the past 2 years, and she's in P5 now. She struggles with long word problems, especially those using heuristics. And I also understand that she's good at reading and drawing models, but she makes a lot of calculation errors. So the parent would like to know whether there are any good strategies to help this child. So my answer to this will be when it comes to word problems, we use the framework, the Polya framework, which is 4 steps in problem solving. So it helps the learner to do it step by step. In order for them to break down the question into various parts. So firstly, they will understand the question, then they will devise the plan, and then they will solve the question, and we will also have checking strategies. Now, to answer this question on calculation error, I think when it comes to errors, there are various types of errors. So it could be a very straightforward error where they are making like a very simple calculation error. It could be a regrouping error. So we need to further understand whether the child is having difficulties when it comes to the procedure, the process of doing it, or whether the child is having a very weak conceptual understanding on that regrouping itself. So we perhaps want to identify what kind of error they are making. Like when it comes to when it comes to regrouping, then we probably want to get them to understand what regrouping is about. Or is it because when fractions are involved, then the child is making a calculation error based on that? Or is it when a particular topic, perhaps a percentage is involved, then the child is making error? So we need to understand this better in order to provide the right strategy for the child to avoid such errors. And generally what I do with my learners, and I also advise my student parents to do as well, is to identify the top 3 errors that the students are making based on the to analyze the assessment papers and observations when they are performing a task, and with that to provide relevant strategies so that they could go back to the whenever they are doing an assessment or when they are doing any piece of work, they go back and check for this particular errors and see whether they have done it correctly. Okay, so that would be for that. We also have another question. How can we help kids who are constantly confused with questions like what is less than 25, 3 more than 32? So there are various ways to help the learners. Firstly, they need to understand what the question means. So for some learners, they are not able to answer because they are not familiar with what is less than, more than. So this is where we need to bring in concrete materials. It could also mean that you would want to actually bring up a hundreds chart, get the students to maybe circle number 25 and then ask them, what does less than means? Is it moving forward or is it moving backward? And have a concrete material like a counter to get them to count 2 backwards, which means it's lesser than. So by being able to identify, firstly, to understand the terms is important. So to get them to understand what is more than and less than, and then bring in the concrete materials to get them to identify the numbers and then quantify it. So in that way, the students will be able to visualize, right?
Rebecca,
Okay.
to just hold you on that, I had that problem lesser than and more than when I was a child as well, I used to always stop to think
So
whether
I
which
think,
one is it.
so that's a common error. And I think we need to address it at an early stage, because eventually what happens is as they move along in levels, as well as when they go on to secondary level as well, there's a comparison. So they need to make comparison of numbers, and therefore they need to understand what is more than and less than in order for them to understand the symbols which are associated with that. Okay. There's another question. Fractions are very abstract topics. How can I make it more explicit for my child to master the concept? I totally agree. Fractions are very abstract topics because students are moving from whole numbers and then eventually they need to understand fractions. So fraction itself, firstly, they are working within a whole. So they need to understand the concept of whole numbers, and then they also need to understand part of a whole. So part of whole is something that students are already familiar with at a lower primary level because they are introduced to model drawing, because model drawing is where part of a whole comes in, addition, subtraction, all this involves actually fractions. So when we are bringing in the topic on fraction, again, go back to concrete part. So get probably use materials that are relevant to the learners. So for instance, by using maybe a piece of cake, and cutting it into 4 equal parts and getting them to understand what is the whole. What does the 4 parts represent? If let's say one part is eaten, what is this part that represents? Associate it through drawings. So from concrete, where they are looking at it using a cake, show it through a model, maybe represented using a shape, for example, and eventually show them through the fractions. So they need to be able to understand, what does a numerator represent? What does the denominator represent? What is a whole number in this? By doing so, they are able to relate to it. They're able to visualize it, and you're moving from concrete, pictorial, and then to the abstract concept itself. So in that way, you're helping them to understand the concept
Sure.
in a more thorough manner. Yeah.
Rebecca, I've got a question for you.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned about formative assessments, am I right? Just now.
Yes.
How can parents then conduct these assessments for their child, or get ready their child, and how would this be useful for the learners, actually?
Oh, okay. Yeah, a very good question. So parents can firstly try to consolidate their observation of their child's abilities. Okay, they need to note how they answer the questions, what kind of errors they make, look at how they perform in a particular task, analyze their assessment paper, have a conversation with the teachers, see whether these errors are commonly made during lessons as well, and have a conversation with the child to understand why they have answered in a certain way. I think mostly we'll be looking at the product. I mean, when I mention product, it's like we are looking at whether the child got the answer right or wrong. But maybe we might overlook on the process, like why the child has actually answered in a certain manner. So understanding the process in order to identify the issues that the child will enable us to provide the right strategy and support. Okay, so it will allow the parent to support the learner in a more effective manner.
Okay, keep those questions coming in. I have a few more. Rebecca, have you got any other questions to answer?
Okay, I'm looking at the Q&A right now.
Sure.
Okay, there's another question. What is the sequence of introducing model drawing? Which ones do we teach first, and what vocabulary should be focused on? So when we talk about vocabulary itself, math itself, there might be some overlaps in the terms used in mathematics. So it's important that whenever we introduce a specific topic to the learner, like for example, in whole numbers itself, we need to get the students to understand the specific terms used in that topic. So for example, as I said, when it comes to fractions, the students need to know what is a numerator, what's a denominator, what's a whole number, what's a mixed number, what's an improper fraction, what's a proper fraction. So there are so many different terms. And sometimes students are not able to answer the question accurately because of the vocabulary used. So going back to the question on model drawing, there are different types of model drawing. We have part whole models, we have unitary models. So, and first thing students need to know is, what does this model represent? What is it exactly that we are trying to achieve through this model? So the objective is for learners to transfer this mathematical information, to translate it using pictures, so that it's easier for them to answer the question. So we probably got to do this simultaneously while the students are reading the question. They probably got to represent it using these blocks, insert these numbers, represent it, so that they are able to see what exactly this model is representing. So there's no hard or fast rule, but usually at the lower primary level, we introduce part whole models to learners.
Yeah, I think to be fair, if you look at the Q&A, there's one parent who actually wrote in, how do I teach a primary one regarding a cake and 1/4 cake? Can you see it, Rebecca? The last question that just came in was quite interesting. I suppose it emphasizes what you said, use a model. Could this be considered?
Okay, so you mentioned it's a primary one child, is it?
I think it was said something about a model being, how do I explain to my child? Just let me just have a look. It says, how do we teach differences between Tom ate 1/3 of the rice, right? And half kg versus Tom ate 1/3 of half kg.
Okay, so over here, we again, going back to the basics. So first thing, they need to understand what is 1/3. Okay, 1 out of 3. And they also need to understand what is half. So in a way, we have to go back to equivalent fractions. They must be able to understand what's the relationship. So sometimes they see 1/3 because the denominator is a 3. And over here, we are looking at half. The denominator is 2. So what does 3 means, and what does this 2 represent? So that's something that we need to address first. And we have to get them to visualize this, because this question is very abstract. So students will get confused, especially with the language and the vocabulary used. So first thing, I would draw out this 1/3. Okay, 1 out of 3. So I probably want to use blocks, or I could even represent using unifix cubes, anything that's concrete for them to understand. Okay, so 1 out of 3. And then off the rice. Okay, so versus Tom ate 1/3 of half kg. So 1/3 of half kg means I'm actually not looking at the whole, but I'm actually looking at just half kg. So I will probably have to show them the half, and I'm looking at 1 out of the 3 of the half. So you got to you can use models to represent this by differentiating using colors. So half is represented maybe using a green color, and 1 out of 3 is represented using a different color, and to merge and show them that this is what it means by 1/3 of half kg. So this has to be done, again, as I said, simultaneously. They must be able to visualize it while they also look at the fractions.
Everyone, we are actually reaching the end of our Q&A. Just wrapping up with 1 or 2 more questions. If you're unable, as I said, to answer some of your questions, please send it through our feedback form, or through the QR code, or through the link that is shared in the chat feature. Okay. Just to tie up, Rebecca, I've got like maybe 1 more question, right? These strategies that you use, right? You are mentioning, actually, how well can you tailor them to the child? I mean, in some of the strategies, besides modeling, any other things, especially in maths, what would you be able to handle?
Okay.
How do you help these learners, with learning difficulties grasp, I suppose?
Okay, so when I mentioned about strategies, right, there's so many different strategies that are available, right? So I think when it comes to parents, they'll be like looking at so many different strategies shared with them. So they must be wondering, so which one is it really appropriate for my learner? Which one should I be using? And there'll be this question like, is it accepted in school? Should I be using it? Is this the right way of teaching my child? So I think very importantly, as I said, not all learners are the same. Similarly, not all their learning difficulties are the same. So we have to firstly understand the profile of the learner. We need to first try to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So by identifying and understanding the profile of the learner would help us to see what is it that this child would need. So probably if let's say this child is at the concrete level, then the child would need lots of concrete manipulatives, a lot of real manipulatives for them to understand what each of the concept means. So certain strategies might be helpful for the learner. So going back to what I shared earlier, the division question, for some learners, they are already familiar with the usual way of doing the division, but the other strategy that I shared it's just slightly different from what we do the usual way, but it helps learners to visualize the number because they are grouped together, and it helps them to understand it better in that sense. It's not cluttered. So as I said, we need to understand the profile of the learner. Similarly, for our learners as well that we receive at DAS, we try to understand their profile first. We try to see what is it that we need to provide support in, and we bring in certain strategies. So I might be introducing some strategies to my learners, and I realize that, oh, they're not able to get it, or they are not very comfortable with it. Then I'll think of an alternate strategy to help the learner.
Okay.
Yes, hope that addressed the question.
Thanks a lot. I think we may have to round up. The last 1 question I can ask just came in. My son is in primary 6, all right, and he can't do multiplication and division, thus not being able to do his fractions. Is there anything that I can do to make it easier, or how can he help? I think it's the parents that's asking. Have you got any suggestions to?
Okay. So when it comes to multiplication, for learners with very strong, for some learners, they are able to learn through memory. I mean, they are just able to rote memory. They keep memorizing the multiplication table. So there's not much of an issue in that. But for some learners, that itself could be a barrier for them to move on with the different topics, like especially when it comes to fraction, right? So they are dealing with bigger numbers and all that. So in that sense, I will probably teach them a strategy to remember their multiplication table. So at DAS, we do introduce learners like the grid method. So if you go and find out, if you go and type out in YouTube the 9 grid method, for multiplication, 6 timetable, for 3 timetable, we have the grid method where students don't really have to remember the timetable by heart, but there is this strategy that they could easily remember the timetable, which I teach most of my learners who are very weak in multiplication table, and it really helped them a lot to cope with that, with in remembering the multiplication table. So yes, I hope that answered that question as well.
Okay. Okay, we are running out of time. So for everybody, thank you for all your questions. As I said before, there are some of you that we have not actually given an answer. We will actually definitely get the answers and email it to all of you. Coming back to the talk, I mean, basically the webinar, as mentioned earlier, we will be sharing some of the upcoming maths courses relevant to this talk. If you'd like to know more, please do stay back after this talk and we should be able to guide you or even answer some of your questions regarding the upcoming courses. Now, we will be playing the earlier video that shows the course that the DS Academy offers. I'm going to go into some of the upcoming courses so that you get some information, okay? After the video, we will answer these queries. Okay, thank you everybody for attending this talk and being such wonderful participants. Now, the next webinar we're going to have is something to do with Chinese without tears. It will be on the 1st of April on Thursday. You may go to our website to gather more information about this webinar. Do join us and I hope to see you, all right? Now, the DAS Academy has courses that are relevant to this webinar and many more other topics. And we are sharing 3 courses right now today, so that gives you upcoming information. The link posted at the chat box, as you can see, you may also visit the website for other courses that are upcoming, okay? Now, for example, I went through just now, the Certificate in Supporting SPLD Learners in Higher Order Mathematical Skills, which will run from the 7th to the 29th of April. Do check it out because registration closes on the 1st of April. Right, we have another course, which is also coming up, supporting your child in maths, problem solving using heuristics. Now, this is interesting, right? I think this is something that all our children go through. That's going to be held on the 24th of April, all right, 2021. Now, this workshop particularly will be introducing participants to various heuristics and problem-solving approaches needed to solve our daily common maths word problems at an upper primary level. Now, this one's closing, the registration is closing on the 21st of April. So please do check it out, okay? I feel it's quite important. Lastly, we also have an education series workshop, okay? Problem-solving strategies for the lower primary students. Now, this one is held on the 2nd of June, okay? This workshop aims to equip educators with strategies to break down simple word problems in a more manageable manner for learners, okay? Now, this is interesting with learning difficulties so that they're able to solve them rather than just trying to by heart or guessing through the logical reasoning. Now, for this one, the registration closes on the 28th of May. As again, do check it out. Now, don't forget to check out the DAS website. Last but not least, we look forward to seeing you soon. All right, with this, we have come to the end of our talk for today. And here's wishing you all of y'all a very good weekend. Okay, stay safe and stay happy.